Hey everybody, welcome to Do You Believe on Paranormal Zone TV. Hey, thanks everyone for joining me tonight. And thanks so much for being here the day before Halloween, our Halloween season, and this is the last show for the Halloween season. I'm gonna miss this month. And everybody, thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, would you please subscribe to my channel? I'd really appreciate it. And tonight I am so excited. I've been wanting to do a show on the Villisca Ax Murders for at least last 2 years, and I finally found a guest, Dr. Ed Epperly, and I'm so excited to have Dr. Epperly on the show. Dr. Epperly, thanks so much for joining me tonight.
Well, I'm glad to. Excited about it.
Oh, me too. I'm so glad I found you. Now, Dr. Epperly, would you please, I know you're the foremost expert on this case, but would you please tell the viewers a little bit about yourself, please, before we start the show?
Sure. I'm calling from Decorah, Iowa, where I've lived now for about 40 years. I taught at Luther College. I was in the education department. I worked with young people who were going to be high school teachers. I was a history teacher on public schools myself, and I grew up in Iowa, in southern Iowa, about, maybe 100 miles from Villisca, and I had heard of it as a child back in the 1940s and 50s that there had been a murder in Villisca, and so when I went away to college, went to Iowa State Teachers College, which is now the University of Northern Iowa, and I took a course in Iowa history, and I and two friends decided to do a joint term paper based on original research. So we went to Villisca in 1955 in the summer and spent a weekend interviewing people and looking at newspapers and so on. The two friends went on to higher and better things, but I got interested in it, and I've just worked on it off and on as I had time. It's really been a hobby, I suppose. And I finished, I haven't really done very much research anymore for the last 10, 15 years. And now that I'm retired, I've got a book in process, and I think all goes well. I'll issue that book next year along with the Fourth Wall Productions, which is a company that put out a documentary film on the Villisca murder, Villisca Living with a Mystery, and I acted as a consultant with them and got to know them, and I think we'll issue the book together probably.
Oh, that would be awesome. So why don't we get into the story then of the Villisca Ax Murders. Now, I was going to ask you, between 1911 and 1912, there was a spree of that swept across the Midwest of axe murders, but there was also one in 1910. Now, does this have anything to do with the Villisca Ax Murders?
It certainly does. No one has been convicted for the Villisca murder. There was one man tried for it. But one of the viable theories that many people believe was that it was a serial killer was behind the murder, and there were a series of murders that started in September of 1911. I'm not sure about the one you're referring to in 1910. We can talk about that. There were several murders that later became associated with the series, but the ones that everyone agrees on, there was a murder. The first one was in Colorado Springs, in which two families were killed with an axe in, I believe it was the 30th of September, 1911. And then 2 weeks later in Monmouth, Illinois, there was a family, a man and wife and young daughter, they were bludgeoned to death, and they didn't find a weapon until several weeks later when they were tearing down a shed on that property, and under some steps they found a length of gas pipe with a T ending that the killer had used to kill them there.
Oh, so he didn't use an axe in that one?
It was a gas pipe in that one.
Oh.
The blunt instrument rather than an axe. And then in 2 weeks after that, in Ellsworth, Kansas, there was an axe murder in which a family of 5, a husband and wife and 3 children, were killed with an axe. All of these murders occurred on the weekend. They had lots of similarities. There was never anything stolen. They used a weapon of opportunity. The killer picked up a weapon in the yard or in a neighbor's yard to kill them. Seemed to be no motive other than the killing itself. It looked like there was a sexual, well, there was definitely a sexual motive in the Ellsworth murder, and also looked like in Monmouth. This is all you see about 9-10 months before the Villisca murder.
Right.
And then the week of the Villisca murder on Wednesday night, the Villisca murder was on Sunday night, the 9th of June, 1912. And on Wednesday night in Paola, Kansas, which is a small town, 30, 40, 50 miles southwest of Kansas City, there was a murder, a husband and wife, a very young couple. They'd just been married a short time. They were killed. They never found the weapon in that murder. It was, some people thought it was a pickaxe, others thought it was perhaps a mason's hammer. But the weapon apparently was taken by the killer because it was not found in the searches that took place afterwards. Some people have not associated that murder with the other 4 murders, but there are a lot of similarities. If you read the newspaper accounts, you would think you were reading the same killer, probably.
So what were all the similarities between these?
Well, there were multiple things. As I said, they all happened on a weekend. They all happened with a weapon of opportunity. I believe all of the cases, most of them at least, the faces were covered. The victims were all struck in the head. They weren't struck anywhere below the neck, and the killer had covered the faces. They were all killed in bed when they were asleep, apparently. There didn't seem to be any running around the rooms or anything like that. Those are the kind of similarities they were. There are a lot of other, some other rather subtle similarities. There's some evidence that the killer might have gone from one house to yet another looking for a second victim. In Colorado Springs, that was definitely the case. They killed 3 people in one house, and then I believe 4 in the other. I'm pulling this information out of my head. I didn't prepare for this, and it's possible I'd be off by a victim here and there, but I think not. I believe there were 7. And then in Monmouth, Illinois, there was no evidence that anyone noticed a killer anywhere else. But in Ellsworth, Kansas, the killer struck, and that same evening, a person in a house a block or 2 away had somebody try to break in their back door, removed a screen and tried to open a window. So that was a suspicious thing. In the Paola murder, there was a person, the 2 people were killed, and then about midnight, a woman and her daughter awakened by breaking glass. And here was a man standing in the bedroom doorway, and he had dropped the chimney of a lamp, and that broke, and she screamed, and he ran, and he dropped a kimono on the floor. And they later found that kimono and attributed it to the murdered woman. So it appeared that the killer had gone from one house to another. But let me get to the Villisca murder.
Yeah, let's get to that. I've been dying to... Go ahead.
It's very similar, actually. As I said, it was on Sunday night, and wasn't discovered until Monday morning, about 8:30. People had noticed that the house was quiet. It's a small house, still standing. It is a two-story house, actually story and a half, and all of the shades were drawn so that nobody could see in the windows. And the brother of the murdered man came down because the murdered man had not opened his store. He had a hardware store, and he also sold farm implements. And they tried to get in, and finally the brother tried a skeleton key, and he got in a front door. There were two front doors. One, they opened off a small porch that was in the front. The house is not very large. And he walked across the room, the front parlor, and he pushed open a bedroom door, and he could see two figures in the bed. And they were covered, but he saw blood on the bedstead, and he left right away and called the marshal, a man named Hank Horton. And Hank and Ed Selle, who was a clerk in the hardware store, they went in the house. And as Hank described it, he said it was dark as night. Every window shade had been pulled down completely to the sill. The killer had taken garments, women's skirts, and covered the glass in the front door window. You know, a lot of doors in those days had etched glass windows, and he'd covered those, so there was no light escaping or coming in at all. So Hank struck a match and used that light to get across the front parlor, and he went into that back bedroom, pulled back the covers, and there were two people who he described as either a woman, or he thought they were either two girls or a girl and a woman. They were unrecognizable. They'd been struck with an axe, and so he couldn't recognize the features. And in the room to the east, the bed ran north and south in that room, and to the east, on the east wall, was a lyre-back dresser with a large mirror, and the killer had draped a skirt across the mirror, so it had been covered. The axe itself, it still had some blood and hair. It had been wiped, but it still had some blood and hair on it. Was leaning up on the south wall, and right beside it was a 4-pound piece of bacon that had been wrapped in a piece of cloth. Some people said it was a cheesecloth, and others said no, it was more like a dish towel.
So why do you think he left bacon?
Then there was a lamp on the floor at the foot of the bed. Okay, what did you say?
Oh yeah, I have a picture of the axe and the lamp. But what significance was the slab of bacon?
Well, nobody knew. Everyone was surprised at that. The bacon came from a back parlor. It was the name of the family was Moore, Josiah Moore, or Joe Moore, and his wife Sara. And they had 4 children. These 2 people were not identified. They didn't think there were more children, of course. But in the back pantry off the kitchen, there was a side of bacon, and they believed that the piece that was in the bedroom had been cut from that piece of bacon. Nobody could explain that. It didn't make any sense to people. Some people suggested that it was a tramp, and this was his kit, his food that he was carrying with him, and he had forgotten it. But that didn't seem very realistic. Not many people put much stock in that. The authorities had no idea what it might be, and they still don't. I mean, there's no definite explanation about it. The only explanation that was offered did not occur until 1917, 5 years after the murder. There was a trial being prepared, and the Iowa State Attorney General, a man named Havner, he contacted a man named Thacker, who was the president or head of the Oregon Prisoner Aid Society. This group, I think they were in Portland, Oregon, I believe. They were a group volunteer group that helped prisoners when they were released from prison. They would get them jobs, they would counsel them, give them money and support. It was a benevolent organization. He must have been somewhat of a criminologist because the Iowa Attorney General knew of him and contacted him by letter, and in that letter he described the scene, and he asked, and he also described the personality of the man they were trying for the murder, and asked for that man's, Thacker's, opinion about this. Could this fellow have done it, and what kind of an explanation? And he made the bacon the central aspect of the murder. The one girl, the woman who was unidentified, proved to be a 11-year-old girl. She had been pulled down in the bed about halfway.
Okay, was that one of the? Was that either Lena or Ina, or is that one of the Moore children?
No, that's Lena Stillinger.
Oh, okay.
The two girls were just friends who were staying overnight. They didn't know any of this at the time they first discovered them, but by mid-morning they had figured that out. And they had come into a church service on Sunday night, and then they had stayed in town with the Moores and were going to walk home with their teacher in the morning when she went out to the country school. They lived about a mile out in the country. The Moore house is on the east edge, actually the northeast edge of Villisca. And so they lived, their names were Stillinger. Some people pronounce that Stillinger. But this girl had been pulled down in the bed. Her shoulders were on the bed flat, but she was rotated at the waist with one leg drawn up, and she was exposed. Her undergarments had been removed, and her nightgown had been pushed up above her waist. And Thacker, the Oregon criminologist, he argued that the bacon showed that the person who did the murder had looked at her and was using the bacon as an artificial vagina.
Oh my
as
God.
a way to masturbate.
Oh, I never heard that before.
Well, I don't know whether that's true or not. That was Thacker's theory, and that's the only theory that was ever offered, really, for why the bacon could be there just as the simple reason that the killer spent a lot of time in the house. The doctors estimated that the murder occurred around midnight. The windows were all covered, as I've said. The door was covered. The mirror was covered. The bacon was located. Hank Horton, the marshal who came in and discovered the two girls, he went on upstairs. The clerk, Sally, had had enough, and he went out on the front porch. So Marshal Horton went up alone. The very narrow S-curved stairway leading up to the upstairs, and when you get up to the top of the stairs, there isn't a hallway. You're right in the bedroom of Joe and Sara Moore. And their bed ran east and west. Joe was on the south side. Sara was on the north side. And they had their shoes under the bed, as a lot of people do, or did. And when Joe was killed, the blood from his wounds ran across the pillow and filled the shoe, one of Sara's shoes. But when it was discovered in the morning, the shoe had been tipped over and more blood had dripped on the sole of the shoe. And the way they interpreted that was the killer had struck them, and sometime later it had to be long enough that the blood had filled the shoe. Sometime later, kicked the shoe over, and then the blood dripped on it. And they thought that happened during the night because by the time the house was opened, about 8:30, and the bodies were discovered, the blood had all congealed.
Who discovered them?
So
Who discovered them?
The brother, Rossmore, actually was the first one in the house. He didn't go upstairs, but he knew there was something wrong because he could see bloody figures in the downstairs bedroom. So he brought the town marshal, and that's Hank Horton, who was just a typical small-town Iowa marshal, never had anything like this before. He's the one that actually went through and first saw the bodies. Again, all the bodies were lying in bed, covered with bedclothes, and they had face cloths over their faces.
So he
They'd
covered.
all been struck.
So he struck
Face.
them. So then, after he killed them, he covered their faces. Now,
Yes, he did.
Now I had read that he may have followed like a Victorian protocol where in the Victorian days they would, if there was a death, they would cover mirrors, they would cover windows, and so maybe that went along with him covering their face. Did he have some kind of decency?
That has, that's one theory that's been proposed, and that might well be true. The covering of mirrors when there is a corpse in the house was a pretty strong, not even a superstition, a pretty strong tradition at that time. When Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, he lay in state in the White House, and people came by and viewed the body, and they draped all of the mirrors with black crepe. They were all covered. I believe maybe even when Queen Victoria was lying in state that the mirrors were covered, but I'm not sure about that. But I am sure about the Lincoln covering.
Mm-hmm. Now there's hardly any picture. There are no pictures.
No.
They did hire a photographer, but nobody has any pictures. What happened?
I'd love to have them.
I bet. Oh.
There were pictures taken because there is a reference in the Board of Supervisor minutes. Board of Supervisors in Iowa is a group that maintains county affairs, and they paid some money, $30, something like that, for Villisca photographs, it said. That was about a month after the murder. So somebody took some pictures. I don't have any evidence that those pictures were taken the day of the murder, but they might have been. I don't know. But the county paid for some pictures, but to my knowledge, no one knows where they are. I've never seen them. A few days later, during the week of the murder, there was a photographer from Creston, which is a somewhat larger town to the east, about 40 miles. He came to town, and he got some cooperation and got in the house, and he made a set of 18 lantern slides. But they were not of the victims or anything. They were posed pictures and pictures of the house and things like that. And those were shown in movie theaters. He put together a little short of these 18 pictures. And there was a great uproar about that. He started showing them about 2 weeks after the murder. And he showed them in Creston, and he showed them in another town, which is a bit east of Villisca, called Corning, Iowa. And the local citizens were incensed, and they tried to get the governor of Iowa to block it. And they pointed out that, it's free speech, and they have a right to do it, and they couldn't stop it. But he didn't show it anymore. So I think the uproar was great enough that he didn't want the trouble that might come from it. I don't know if they would have sued him or what they would have done, but they were
so what happened to those slides?
Well, they surfaced a few years ago in a school teacher in southeast Iowa at Washington. Well, actually, a little town beyond Washington was showing them. He had them. He had bought them at a sale or something. I don't know where he got them, but they were stolen, and so they have not been found. But they existed in the 1970s.
Oh my!
Not available now.
So, whoever stole those pictures, what are they doing with them? Because they haven't resurfaced.
No, they haven't. I have a suspicion that they were stolen, and then they were afraid to do anything with them, because they are obviously stolen goods, and I don't think they were the type of thing. They were not really photographs of the scene or anything like that. They were photographs of the house and so on. The only authentic photographs that I know of are, I know of two. One of them is a photograph of the lamp that was left at the foot of the bed, and the axe is hanging beside it. And that was taken the week of the murder. And then there is a photograph of the mirror that is covered in the downstairs bedroom. And those are the only two that were actually taken in the house at the time of the murder. But anyway, continuing, the killer was now upstairs and had killed the parents, and there were 4 children. They had 3 boys and a girl, and I think the oldest boy was 12, and the youngest was 5. The girl was 9, and they had all been asleep in their beds, struck with the axe. The axe is a large single-bitted axe. You said you had a photograph of that?
Oh, yeah, I'm showing pictures.
Yeah, I knew you would be, or you said you would be. And that axe, I don't know anything about axes, but I have read that was called a Michigan axe. And I did get on the internet just out of curiosity, and there is a company that sells a Michigan axe. I suppose it's a Michigan company. I don't recall. And it has this particular axe has a very distinctive barrel handle. I mean, the end of the handle has it's carved into a barrel shaped. The axe weighs a little bit over 4 pounds. Single bitted, which means it has a blade on one end and a butt or a heavy ends in a kind of a hammer-like arrangement on the other end. It's quite long. I don't remember the measurements. The measurements were given in the trial. It was entered as a exhibit, and it showed that how long it was, how much it weighed, and that kind of thing.
Now the trial. Now it was. How many people were? There was only one. There was only one that went on trial. Was that Reverend? Lyle.
Kelly.
Yeah, Kelly. Was he the only one that went on trial for this?
That's right. What happened? It's one of the reasons I really got involved in the case is it's so complex. There are so many threads that run through it. But you see, the murder was in 12.
Yeah.
The summer of 1912. The original assumption that the police made and the newspapers made was that it was another one of these killings that had occurred back in 11. It was a serial killer. That didn't lead anywhere, and rather quickly that faded, so that nobody locally thought about that much. They had an individual in town who had what they thought was a motive. If you and I would look at the scene, it would be hard for us to believe that that was a sufficient motive for this. Instead, it looked like a psychological murder, a sexual murder, and a motiveless murder. And the local banker, a man named Jones, was not very well liked in town. He had a lot of money, had a lot of resentment of him. He was a business competitor of the murdered man. He ran a hardware store and sold implements just like Joe Moore did. In fact, Joe Moore had been his employee for a number of years, and then he left and opened a competing business. So there was a business competition. Mm-hmm. But the thing that caused the people to suspect Jones was the fact that Jones's daughter-in-law, Donna, had married his only son. She was a young woman then of about 20, 21, and she was a good-looking woman, and she had been having an affair with Joe Moore, the murdered man. And everyone in town knew it because she arranged, he would come up and visit her at her house when her husband was gone.
And what was her name?
Donna Jones.
Oh, I have a picture of her. Okay. Mm-hmm. And she was, wait a minute, she was having an affair with Joe?
Yep.
Oh my God, no kidding.
Well, go ahead.
Oh no, I didn't know. I didn't.
She was having an affair. Well, it really, it too is a strange element of the case because she was receiving telephone calls from Joe Moore asking if it was all right to come over, and she would say, yes, he's not here, and then Joe would come over, supposedly. But at the same time, she was having telephone calls from at least one other man who was doing the same thing, a man named Davy. That's a last name, Albert Davies. And that caused the most consternation because...
Oh, my God.
4 months after the murder, there was a dust-up, the telephone light lit up in the central office, and this was the days when usually young women plugged in, made the connections between the parties.
Yeah.
So they thought there was a call, and consequently they took the cord and made a connection. And what was going on, there was a fight. Albert Jones, the son of F.F. Jones, the banker, had come home, apparently, and caught Albert Davies there, and they had gotten in an argument, and then they heard a shot over the telephone. And Albert Jones had pulled a pistol and shot Albert Davies in the thumb. He had not quite shot it off, but he had damaged it pretty severely. And everyone in town knew it because the telephone operators were listening in on the conversation. And why Donna was doing that, I mean, I don't know if she was so naive that she didn't realize everyone listened to the conversations or not, but anyway, that was common knowledge in town.
Okay, so I want to get back to this Reverend Lynn George, what's his last name? Kelly, yes. Why did they suspect him?
Well, they began to suspicion him the summer of the murder. When I say they, I mean the state investigators who got involved in the case, because he was obsessed with the murder. He had been in Villisca actually. He had been in Villisca that weekend. He was living in a town of Macedonia, Iowa, which is maybe 40 miles northwest of Villisca. And he came in on a train on Saturday, and he went out and he preached. He was preaching for the Presbyterian Church. He was preaching in 2 churches outside of town, and on Sunday night he came into the town and he stayed overnight with the Presbyterian minister. And they'd had a special service that night, so he went to church on Sunday night, the 9th of June, the murder night, and then he went home with the Presbyterian minister, but the Presbyterian minister and his wife and their kids all went out in the backyard and slept in a tent because the minister was having, or the Presbyterian minister, a man named Ewing, was having throat trouble. He had severe problems with his throat. In fact, he died of it not too many years beyond this. Mm-hmm. And so Kelly was in the manse, the house, alone that night. And after the murder, he got obsessed with the murder, and he wrote letters to everybody. He wrote to the brother of the murdered man, he wrote to the town marshal, he wrote to the county attorney, he wrote to the state attorney general, he wrote to some private detectives, in which he talked about quite a bit of detail. He claimed that the killer was disturbed during the evening, when he was in the house, and waited until a couple walked by the house. He talked about hearing the thud of the axe, things that would be difficult for anybody to do unless they had been in the house. And so they began to suspicion him. He was a tiny little man. He was 5'2" and weighed 119 pounds when he was arrested. So, but they didn't move on him because he seemed to be mentally, his adjustment was not very good, and they couldn't tell what he was imagining and what he had experienced. And then he sent a bloody shirt to the laundry in Council Bluffs the week of the murder. And they followed that up. They went out and interviewed the laundry people and confirmed it and proved that he had done that. And he also had a history of voyeurism, window peeking.
Oh.
He was caught.
You mean he could reach the mirror? He could reach the windows?
What's that?
He could reach the window sills?
Oh, yeah, he wasn't that short.
Oh. So this little guy, but actually, I have a picture of him with Lena and Ina's father. I couldn't find a picture of the mother. But you know what also I found really strange is that Lena and Ina, their mother and father was also Joe and Sara.
Yeah, that's true.
When I found that out, I thought,
that's called coincidence, I think.
oh my God, I thought, oh my God, am I reading this right? Both parents are Joe and Sara. I just thought that was really strange. But I have a picture with Reverend Kelly and John Montgomery. I guess that's Sarah Moore's father.
That's correct.
And Mr.
That was taken during the trial.
Oh.
And the purpose of that is was to demonstrate, by the people who were defending Kelly, to demonstrate that the closest relatives of the murdered victims were really friendly to Kelly, didn't believe he was guilty.
Oh my God.
It was designed to try to influence public opinion and the jury during the trial.
Oh.
Yeah, that picture was taken right across the street from the courthouse. The county seat of Montgomery County, where all this took place, is Red Oak.
Oh.
In the courthouse, there was a hotel right across the street called the Johnson House, and that's where that picture was taken. Now, I believe if I know the one you're looking at, there's a pillar and some plantings behind them. It was taken on the...
Yeah, it looks like a house behind them, really.
Yeah, it's really a hotel.
Oh, okay.
You're looking at a porch.
Right, exactly.
Around one side of the hotel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
But you see, Kelly was suspected of the murder, but they didn't have what they felt was a sufficient case. They were worried because he was so obviously mentally ill But then in 1914, that's 2 years now after the murder,
Yeah.
Kelly had left Iowa and was preaching in the Methodist Church at Winter, South Dakota, which is a small town in South Dakota.
And did his wife go with him?
What's that?
Did his wife Laura go with him?
Oh yes,
Oh.
He was from Kelly was from England, and he and she came in 1904 as they were sponsored by the Methodist Church as preacher. He came as a preacher, and she was quite loyal and stuck with him through all of the ups and downs in his life. But while he was preaching in winter, he put an ad in the Omaha World Herald asking for a stenographer. And he was working on a book and a novel, I think, and he wanted a stenographer, and a young woman from Council Bluffs answered that ad, and he wrote back and told her that she sounded fine, but he did want her to know that he wanted her to type in the nude.
This guy is sick. He's sick.
So
that guy is
she
sick.
responded. What happened was she took it to her pastor, and they went to the marshal, and the marshal took it to the postal authorities. And so the pastor and the marshal wrote a response, supposedly being Jessamine, and she signed it, and he was so excited when he got the letter back, because she had basically said, I haven't seen the letter, but she had basically said something to the effect of, well, this sounds interesting, tell me more. And he got progressively more salacious in the letters he wrote back to her, and after the Postal Department felt they had sufficient evidence and case, they arrested him, had him arrested for sending obscene material through the mail.
Oh, my God.
And so he was then tried for that and convicted, but he was by this time so obviously mentally ill. He had some delusions. He thought he was President Wilson.
Oh, my God. Well, what do you think? From everything that you've researched, do you think that he could have been the killer?
He could have been.
Now, if he's wait a minute now, Ed, if he's such
he might not have been either.
Hey, but if he's such a little wimpy guy, how could he have taken that axe and did what he did?
Well, that's what everyone suggests. I mean, that's one of the reasons that the police were reluctant to press the case against Kelly, because of his diminutive stature. They said, well, could he do this, or how would he have nerve to do this?
Well, Dr. Epperly, another thing is, if this Villisca Axe murders are connected to the other ones in those other states, did they have any evidence that he had been traveling in those other states at that time?
Well, yes and no. Mostly no. The state tried very hard to find a connection between Kelly and those other murders, and they weren't able to. There were a couple of things, though, that really cause you to wonder. One of them, Kelly gave us a Chautauqua speech. I mean, he used it to raise money. He never had enough money, and so he would go around and talk. Let's see, what did he call that speech? Tears and laughter of the old country folk. And he talked about England and what it was like to grow up in England. And people paid 25 cents to come to the theater and see it.
Oh, wow.
And he claimed that he gave that 300 times across the Midwest.
Oh.
So if he did, and I think there's some hyperbole there, but he did give it many times at least. And so there may have been a case that he did a fair amount of traveling to give that speech. The other thing, this happened in Winter, South Dakota. This is a haunting thing, my heavens. It was a blustery, blizzardy night in winter, and you can really have blizzards in South Dakota. on the door, and they open it up, and here stands Kelly in a great kind of a bearskin coat. He's their minister, they're Methodist. And the mother, the wife, is 8 months pregnant. And so they, of course, invite him in. He comes in, and he took off his coat, and he sat down, and they had a pot-bellied stove in the middle of the room, and he put his feet up on the stove to warm his feet.
Yeah.
And he started talking, and the way they described it, it's just like there was a switch went on. He didn't seem to notice that they were there. He just seemed to be staring through them. And he talked about the murder, and then he said the killer gave himself away when he sent a bloody shirt to the laundry in Council Bluffs. Well, that was what Kelly did. And then he said, but we shouldn't be too judgmental about him, because he is occasionally seized by this uncontrollable impulse, and he wipes out a whole family.
Oh my
and
God.
They were frightened. His features weren't normal, and he did not appear to be aware of them even. And they were worried about two things. One, they were frightened about what he was talking about and the way he was acting, but they also were worried that this would, quote, mark the unborn child, which was, that was a belief in those days, that some kind of a traumatic experience while the mother was carrying the child would produce a mentally handicapped child, or a physically handicapped child, or things like that. I don't think anyone still believes that, but in those days it was real.
Yeah.
And so they said, you've got to leave, and so he left. But I've often wondered about that, that Kelly was a viable suspect. They tried him. He was sent to a mental hospital and held for 6 months, and then he was released as cured. And about a year after that, he was arrested in the spring of 1917. And then he was tried for the murder in the fall of 1917, September. But by the time he was tried, the local citizens, excuse me, were convinced that the real murderer was the banker, F.F. Jones.
Oh.
And that conviction came because of a detective who came to town named Wilkerson, James N. Wilkerson, who worked for the Burns Detective Agency and then left them and became a private investigator in Villisca, in Montgomery County. And he, from 1914 till 1917, he stirred up a great deal of local feeling, all of it directed towards the banker and the banker's son, and a man named Mansfield, who Wilkerson claimed was the killer hired by the banker to actually do the deed.
Is that William Mansfield?
William Mansfield, that's correct.
Right. Yeah, I have a picture of him. So, and then, now in 1912, isn't that when they first started doing fingerprints?
Fingerprints actually it was first discovered in the 1860s, 1865, 7, something like that.
Oh, okay.
In India, of all places. A British civil servant determined that everyone's fingerprints are unique. But they didn't know what to do with that, because so it's such a complex job of finding, so they're unique, but how do we identify them? If we've got 100,000 prints, how can we find the one that we're looking at? And that system was finally devised at Scotland Yard in London, I think in the late 1890s. And in America, one of the first people who was involved with that was a deputy warden at Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary in Leavenworth, Kansas. His name was McGothry.
Oh, yeah.
And he came to Villisca the second day. He came on Tuesday. After murder was discovered on Monday, and he arrived on Tuesday. Unfortunately, he was stumbling, staggering, falling down drunk when he got off the train.
Oh, my God.
They had to take him to a hotel for 6 hours about before he got able to do anything. And then he made, though, the only really systematic forensic analysis of the scene. He did it on Tuesday and Wednesday of the murder week. What he did was he fingerprinted all of the victims so that if he found a fingerprint, he could eliminate them. And then he tried to get fingerprints in the house, but he really wasn't able to. I'm not a fingerprint expert by any means, but my impression was that in those days they didn't have much like we do now with the dusting to bring out the fingerprint, to highlight it. But instead they like to get one like on a piece of glass that they could photograph or something like that. He tried to photograph prints from the lamp, and he tried to see if he could get any from any of the windows and things like that. But he couldn't find any fingerprints. It probably would not have been significant, because when the murder was discovered, people were running around trying to get help. The marshal was uptown, and he left a night marshal, a young man named Overman, in charge of the scene, and he just couldn't handle it. People started edging into the house. Doctors went through and inspected the bodies, and then they were left in bed, and then the people started coming in, and they estimate that there were certainly dozens of people went through the house, and maybe hundreds. It's hard to say. About 9:30, the county coroner arrived, and he was working in the house with the bodies, and he said to Overman, "Oh my God, why don't you get these people out of here?" And he said, "I can't do it. I push them out the front door and they come in the back."
Oh my.
So it was about 11 o'clock in the morning when a county sheriff from Page County, that's the first county south of Villisca, he got there and saw the scene was out of control, and so he deputized half a dozen men, and they got some wire, and they pushed everybody off the yard and ran a wire around the house so that people couldn't get in. But before that, there had been large numbers of people who got in the house.
Oh my God.
So I'm sure the other thing that the fingerprint expert did, though, he analyzed the cuts in the ceiling. When the upstairs is a gabled upstairs, so that the ceilings are not very high, and the gable runs the house looking south. The room is highest right north and south, and then slopes down to the east and west. And so on the eastern and western sides of the room, you get quite close to the ceiling. And when the killer hit the mother and father, Sara and Joe, he hit the ceiling when he swung the axe.
Okay, so hold on 1 second. Now, with the height of Reverend Kelly, did they have him go back into the house and hold the axe up to see if it touched the ceiling?
No, not to my knowledge.
Oh my God!
That was a part of it. some people speculated that he was too short to hit the ceiling, and so he couldn't have been the killer. In fact, he used that as his own defense. When he was preaching in Sutton, Nebraska, just before he was arrested, months before he was arrested, he was paranoid yet, and when people would come to town, he would get very excited. He would run to his doctor or his lawyer. He had a lawyer and a doctor he contacted, and he would run to them and say, "Who is that? Is that a detective? Are they looking for me?" And then he would say, "I couldn't have killed him in Villisca. I was too short." And his argument being that he wouldn't have hit the ceiling. But the marks over the parents' beds.
Right, I see those marks. I'm showing a picture of it. Now they're
quite low.
Yeah, that is low, but they have markers all the way across. So so they're both in the bed, and this murderer is axing them one at a time. I have no one at a time. What about the other one sleeping next to that person that he's killing? Was there any evidence that one of them woke up? Who did he kill? And I'm assuming it was the wife that was killed first, or was it Joe?
Well, I think most people assume Joe was.
All right, so Joe,
just because he was the most dangerous, and he would probably be the one that the killer would be most worried about and would go for first. But nobody knows. I mean, no one was in the house. There was no way to tell. The reason that they know that they were either asleep or in bed, at least, is that there are no blood trails in the house. There wasn't a pool of blood somewhere that shows somebody had gotten up and was killed and then drugged back into bed or anything like that. The blood was all concentrated at the head of the bed where the person was struck.
And was there any signs or any indication that she struggled for her life?
No. There's some people thought that perhaps Sara Moore, awakened, but it's speculation. There's no basis for it other than the fact that I don't know what that was based on. She was lying on her back right beside her husband. Some people suggested in the murder in Ellsworth, Kansas, the woman that was killed had a depressed fracture across the forehead, and they speculated there that the killer struck the husband, and the wife sat up in bed, and he reached across the bed with the axe handle and hit her in the forehead and knocked her back down. But there wasn't anything like that in Villisca. But now in the south room, that room was also struck, but there the axe marks were out in the middle of the room where it's highest.
Now,
and the way that the guy measured them carefully, this is McLaughlin, the fingerprint expert, he measured how high they were. They were 7 feet, 6 inches, something like that, a little over 7 feet high. And then there were blood spots that had been thrown from the axe when it hit the ceiling. That the blood was knocked off the axe, so to speak, and flew across the room and hit the wall.
Oh.
But those cuts, he pointed out, had nothing to do with the location of the bodies. The bodies were around the room. They had two beds and a cot. You had the one boy was on a cot, or excuse me, the girl was on a cot, one boy was in a bed, and two boys shared a bed. And the way he interpreted the cuts in the middle of the room was that the killer was in a frenzy of excitement and was swinging the axe over his head, one-handed. Because he said that nobody swinging an axe, no reasonable person, would hit the ceiling where the ceiling was scarred. And so his interpretation and was swinging the axe, as he put it, Indian fashion, one-handed over his head.
Okay, well then how could little Kelly have done that? Of course, when you're not all there, I think they do have some kind of extra strength.
Well, this is a speculation that lots and lots of people have had. That how could a little person like that? I don't share that personally. This is Iowa.
Yeah.
We have a long history of college wrestling success. The University of Iowa has won the national wrestling tournament several times. And you see a 120-pound wrestler. They are quick and strong. Kelly was a wiry guy. Some people described him as bird-like. He flitted, he jumped, moved rapidly and changed direction.
Oh my
His
God!
Wife, for all of her size, when they walked, he was always a yard or two ahead, and she had a kind of a half trot to keep up. He was a very quick fellow. You could make a case that, one of the things a lot of people have also speculated, how did the killer get up the stairs without awakening them parents?
Exactly.
Because the stairs are creaky. And I've talked to the county attorney who was prosecuting the case against Kelly, and he said, I've tried to climb those stairs every way possible. I've tried to climb the middle, I've climbed this edge, I've even tried to walk up on the molding along the side rather than on the stair itself, and they just creak. He said it's a creaky stairs. And so maybe you get somebody like Kelly, a small man, he could pad up the stairs more quietly than a big hulking 6 foot, 200-pound man. So you can make a case that his ability to move around the house was facilitated by both his speed and his size.
Wow.
And if he could swing that axe, he could kill you.
The thing about it is, if this happened in our time, and my husband's is a retired San Francisco police detective, and he always told me that when somebody commits a horrific crime like that, where they're stabbed or shot or whatever multiple times, it's usually always a crime of hate. Now, how can he hate these people when he doesn't even know them?
Well, there are really two interpretations in my judgment. We're speculating. I'm not a forensic expert, and so it is pure speculation. But it seems to me, if Kelly was the murderer, he saw these girls going to bed. He was out window peeking. His host was out in the yard, knew nothing about it. After the host left and went out in the yard, he gets up, he goes walking around looking for lighted windows, and the murder house was about no more than 3 blocks straight down the road from where he was sleeping. And so he sees these children going to bed, and they perhaps get in bed, turn out the lights sooner than he'd like. And so he picks up the axe. The axe was their own axe. It was leaning in the backyard. And so he picks that up and goes in. And all of these people got killed because he wanted to be free to look at the one girl that he pulled down in the bed and exposed. And so it was a voyeuristic thing. Mm-hmm. The other explanation, you can build a case, I think, both Joe and Sara, the adults, were just completely mutilated. Sara had been hit with the blade of the axe, and one of the doctors said that she was struck slaunch-wise. Now, that's a word I don't know, but I think it means
at an angle,
at a very acute angle.
Yeah.
With the blade, and her face had been reduced to slices.
Oh my God.
And Joe had been just decapitated. His head was nearly all gone. The face was gone. The top of the skull was gone. About the only thing that was left in Joe was the back part of the skull.
Oh my God. Well, I know in those days they probably didn't do a psychological, you know how they do that today on murderers.
Sure. I know what you...
Yeah. So, since you have been investigating and working on this case on and off for the last 30 years, did anybody do a psychological profile on Kelly?
No, they didn't. They weren't doing things like that. The state tried to, in the trial, preparation for the trial, they tried to. They did about what I was doing there. They matched Kelly's history of voyeurism and all with the scene and the fact that the one girl was exposed. And everyone else, everyone else got killed it's kind of a sociopathic explanation. It seems to me like that he was so lacking in empathy that he was perfectly willing, the killer, to kill killed 8, but he only 7 of them were for no purpose other than to give him time and privacy.
Yeah, he had to be sick to kill them.
The other explanation was that he killed the children to get them out of the way, so to speak. That his real hatred was directed towards the parents, towards the adults.
But why did he hate them? Did they ever find out why did he hate them?
Well, it would have to be some kind of a psychological, the parent figures. They reflected hatred, or it might have been that he felt guilty, and you cover their faces, you cover the victims' faces to dehumanize them, so it doesn't seem like you've done quite the same. But to parents, you're not satisfied to just do that. You want to obliterate them because they mustn't know what you have done or how evil you are. That kind of, but that's psychological speculation. You'd have to body with a, with one psychological approach would come out at one side of that argument, and someone with a different one would come out at another place. But something caused him being the killer, something caused him to be driven, have the needs to do this.
But to do such a horrific crime.
But why does anybody do a horrific crime? Every day we're reading about somebody that we find a serial killer that has killed 20 people over a 30-year period, and sometimes in terrible things, and it's a perversion of our normal development for some reason.
And so they closed this case, in 1917? It's been closed?
Yeah, in 1917, Kelly was acquitted. He was the first trial, it was 11-1 for acquittal, and 1 felt he was guilty by reason, and would be acquitted by reason of insanity. He'd be, guilty, but insane. So they retried him, and that was a month later, and there was a kind of a cursory trial, and he was acquitted then. So Kelly was not convicted of the murder. That put the case at an impasse because the authorities didn't see any point of investigating anymore because they were convinced that Kelly was the murderer. And so they weren't going to find another murderer. They had already found the murderer.
Oh my God.
So they didn't have any impetus to search. And the people who had supported Kelly were convinced that he had been railroaded by this wealthy banker, and the banker was also a state senator and had
Frank Jones,
friends in Des Moines, and so that the attorney general and the governor of the state, they weren't interested in pursuing the banker, and so that theory, the one that is proposed by the detective Wilkerson, that couldn't lead anywhere. And by this time, there hadn't been any other murders after the Villisca murder that were clearly associated together. So the serial killer thing kind of petered out. There wasn't.
Now, what about those murders that happened within that whole year span? I think it was through September and October. Did they ever convict anybody of those axe murders?
No.
No.
Not really.
Oh.
No one in Colorado Springs, no one in Ellsworth, Kansas, no one in Paola, Kansas. In Monmouth, Illinois, they, in 1915, 16, they tried a 3 black for the murder. But it was... here you have a horrendous murder, 3 people killed, and they ended up convicting one of the blacks, but they sentenced him to something like 5 years in prison, very short sentence. And then they, the other 2 were put in a category, a legal category, that they weren't going to prosecute them at this time, but they could resume the case if they wanted to, or if they decided to. And the only evidence against those 3 was the fact that they were blacks that lived in the neighborhood, and that there was a felon in the Iowa Penitentiary at Fort Madison who, for an exchange of a shortened sentence, claimed that they had said they had done the murder. It was so obviously trumped up to clear the books that it carried no weight with me. I don't think that they were guilty. I don't think the state thought they were guilty. It was a travesty, it seems.
Okay, Dr. Epperly.
Basically, nobody was ever convicted for those other murders, no.
Shelley wants to ask a question. The thing is, our chat room is a 30-second delay, and somebody desperately wants to get a question. Shelley, type your question in. That's what's so bad. Type your question in. Let me see if I can see it. Yeah, see, that's a 30-second delay, but Norton, she's typed in big, she has a question. Now Jezebel asked a question. Did the police ever investigate the local place that sold the bacon slabs to see how many people bought bacon slabs the day or the evening before the murders? But that bacon belonged to the Moore family, didn't it?
It did. It wasn't a case that they did look at the 2 pieces of bacon and thought that they had been connected. I don't know that they ever pushed them together to see if there was a precise fit, but I think they didn't do that because it was so obvious that the bacon had come from the Moores themselves.
Yeah.
So that particular approach, I don't think would have helped in this case.
All right. Well, I think we'll call it a night, and I want to thank you so much for being on the show, Dr. Epperly. It was just a pleasure. I've been wanting, like I said, I've been wanting to do this show for the last 2 years, and I found somebody. Thank you so much. Now,
I'm glad to do it.
So what's happening now? Do you have a website, or are you still trying to push the DVD, and it's cute because I have a picture of you. Here, let me show this. I have a picture of you, and it's at a signing of some kind, I guess the DVD signing, and in the background it has Halloween 40% off. And here we are, the day before Halloween.
Well, Halloween is a big holiday for me. I'm nearly always asked by somebody to talk about the murder at or around Halloween, so this is not unusual.
Oh,
actually, I've been working on the book quite a bit, and I'm about finished with that. And I keep in touch with the movie people, the Rundles and Fourth Wall Productions and Villisca, the mystery. But I don't, they're going to be working with me. They've got photographs to put in the book, and they do more writing than I do. I'm not a writer by trade, and so they'll probably do some editing for me, and we hope to get that book out next year if all goes well.
Shelley posted her question. Since the murderer was in the house already, maybe he put something into their milk or nightcaps.
Well, there really isn't any evidence that the murder was in the house. A lot of people believe that.
Yeah, they believe that he was hiding in the upstairs closet.
No, that's one theory.
Ah, okay.
And not based on very much. It was a newspaper man named Hoban, Hoban. I don't know his first name. He wrote for the Kansas City Post, which was a sensational newspaper at the time. And he had a story that there was a footprint in the upstairs closet, and then actually in the downstairs closet too, there was a cardboard box full of cotton ticking, and it was scooped out where a person had been sitting in it.
Right.
And his article advocated that the killers actually were in the house when the people came home, and then came out of the closets and did the murder.
Oh.
But there's no real evidence for that. The authorities did not agree there was a footprint upstairs, nor did they agree there had been any smoking. Some people claimed that there were evidence of smoking. And the cotton ticking, that particular box was sitting on 3 suit boxes. And you know what suit boxes are. They're a light cardboard box.
Right.
And if anybody would have sat down on the cotton ticking, he would have crushed the suit boxes.
Exactly.
So that scooped out part that looked like they'd been sitting in it, probably they weren't. Mm-hmm. So there really is no evidence that there was anyone in the house when the people came home. That's one of, you see, there are all kinds, hundreds of rumors, and they don't have, like there's a widespread rumor that there was a half-eaten meal left on the table in the kitchen.
I did read something about a bowl of water filled with blood.
There was a wash basin in the kitchen, and it had water in it, and some people said it was bloody water, and some people said it was dirty water.
Oh, okay.
But so I'm not in a position to determine whether it was bloody or dirty, because you've got accounts, people who looked at it and reported it differently. Mm-hmm. The assumption has basically been that the killer probably washed his hands. But we don't really know that. It could have been a doctor. There were 3 doctors and the county coroner, all of whom went through the scene and actually touched the bodies, and they may well have washed their hands themselves. We don't know. But it is true there was a basin in the kitchen that had either bloody or dirty water in it. That's right.
Okay, Dr. Epperly, thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I so appreciate it. And if you ever find out any other information that would be really great for me to do another show on the Villisca Murder House, if you come up with any great information or maybe coming close to who might have done it, please let me know. We'll have another show.
Okay, I'm glad to do it.
Thank you so much. Good night and happy Halloween.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
No.
Good night. Okay, everybody. Dr. Epperly, thank you so much for being on the show. It was awesome. I've been so interested in this horrific crime, and may they all rest in peace. And everybody, thanks for joining me on this Thursday night, the night before Halloween. I love this. And so now, in another half hour or so, I've got to get ready because we're going to air a live ITC session with the Ghost Box, and Anthony is going to introduce a new application. So we're all going to be, Anthony and Dave and me and Cindy and Nikki, we'll all be back in about 40 minutes or so. So I'll see you back. Now you have to go back to my channel, the front page on my Paranormal Zone Web TV page, and you'll pick up the link to the show, or you can go to my Facebook page, whatever. So we'll see you in about a half hour. I got to set up. Okay, everybody, good night, and thanks so much for joining me, and thank you. Happy Halloween, and have a safe Halloween as well. Good night, everybody. Thank you. I love you. Thank you.